Hey folks, Sam Green here. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a larger painting. Now larger is a relative term. This one that I'm going to be doing today is 20 by 30 inches. I do it all in one sitting, so the painting happens very, very quickly. I tend not to get bogged down on too much stuff. I tend not to overthink things or worry too much. That being said, there are a few moments where you'll see me kind of nitpick and go back and forth a little bit, and I'll get very specific about color in some places. So I hope that you'll find this demo interesting. Let's take a look at the image before we dive into the demonstration. Hope you enjoy. Hey folks, before we dive into the painting, let's take a quick look at the image here. This is just a quick photo I snapped. I've already cropped it for you to sort of see the most important parts, but you can still see my truck there. So I wasn't too worried about composition or trying to get a great photo. I was really just interested in this great light that was happening here. So I snapped that really quickly before I got in and drove away. Didn't think much of it at the time, but then looked at the photo later on when I got home and knew that I had to work with it a little bit more. So I think what I liked most about it is this awesome light in here. Such a warm light compared to all this, which is very cool, and the sky, which is also very cool. It's such a cool painting, temperature-wise, and then there's this sort of burst of sun that's really changing the color and temperature of that house. If you look at those two things, this is what I love about painting, is that when you look at this area here, those two things are the same color between those two areas. That's the same color house. The house doesn't change color. And so what light can do to really shift the color and temperature, to me, is really fascinating. Before we get going on it, though, I do think the things I'm going to want to think about are, one is capitalizing on these little types of passages. I think there's little passages here that are really nice, to sort of push us back in space if we want. In the same vein, this big house here can sort of pull the space forward a little bit. So there's, despite sort of the subject being in the center there, I think there's lots that are happening on either side of it to sort of bounce our eye around. I think the biggest concern is that all the interesting stuff is happening in the middle, and that down here and up here, it's a little bit boring. And so we have to make sure that we find ways to activate the space in the bottom, maybe using these parking lines, things like that. Also, these power lines might be a great way to sort of activate the sky as well. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. Now this painting is a little bit bigger here. And the first thing you're going to notice about it, probably even more so than its size, is the fact that it's lightly toned with kind of a beige color. I wanted to have something warm on there, just because, like I mentioned before, so much of the painting is cool. And so I wanted sort of a warm background and to just kind of get rid of that white, because I'm trying to finish a fairly large painting here. And again, that's all, large is a relative term, but a large-ish painting here, all in one sitting. And having that toned background is a good way to sort of eliminate those whites, so I can start looking, I can just start seeing it easier right away. It also films better for this purpose as well. And I've got a few different colors laid out here, most of them cool and with maybe a few different hues to them. I'm really just drawing things in. I'm just trying to place things in, and as you can see, I'm kind of scribbling, painting fast. Granted, it is set up at double speed, but I'm really just trying to get those big shapes in as quickly as I can, because despite having looked at this photo, despite being excited about this photo, what I don't want is to get deep into this painting and suddenly realize compositionally there's something that's going to throw me way off, or something that's really just not going to look right. So I'm not worrying too much about, anything. I'm not worrying too much about detail. I'm not worrying about if the perspective is right. I'm not really worrying even too much about about color. I'm really just trying to lay in a few different colors, a few different temperatures, a few different values, so I can begin to see what I think the painting is going to look like. And as you know, you can sort of see here that I'm making quick marks, but also a few lines as well. I'm not using those lines to lock me into, say, the shape of the roof, or perhaps the shape of the house that I'll be looking at. I'm just using lines to just lay out my composition, just sort of see where everything is. I think it's important to note that in this demonstration, what I wanted to do is finish this larger painting in one sitting, in one session. And with that comes decision making maybe that you wouldn't make ordinarily or otherwise. I think that's it's important to note that I was making decisions to work quickly and trying to be as effective as I could right away, knowing that I wasn't going to go back into this, knowing that this was sort of my one shot with this painting. That tool you see there, that's a tapping knife, typically used for drywalling, but it's a great straight edge, and one that I can get paint all over and not worry about too much. It's almost like having a really large palette knife in some ways. I use it to scrape, I use it to put paint down on, and I often use it to lay in some really, really straight lines. Those straight lines can be helpful when you're laying paint in really quickly. I tend not to want to lean on them too much because you don't want to lock yourself in. You don't want to say, okay, this is the shape of my house here, and then just color it in, fill it in with color. But that when the paint is kind of being applied very quickly and it sort of appears to be really muddy, the lines can help to sort of establish what you're looking at and kind of calm you down, I think, in a way, which I think is helpful to sort of say, like, okay, this represents this here. This is the roof line here. And having those lines can really help you not get distracted by some of the muddiness that is potentially going on around it. One of the things that I knew I wanted to achieve in this painting was that awesome sky. It kind of looks simple when you look at the image. What I mean by simple is that there's just this simple little gradient. It's kind of darker at the top and lighter as it gets closer to the horizon, and it's just kind of this even blue color. But what I wanted from the sky was to get that late afternoon feeling sky. I think it's easy, not easy necessarily, but I think it's clear to see that late afternoon light on the house. But there's a real sense in the sky, too, that it's in the late afternoon. And so I wanted to actually be pretty specific with that. As I said, with that tapping knife, it can be a great scraping tool. What I did there was laying this guy very, very quickly, and then I just, I didn't scrape it off too vigorously, but I scraped it off enough so that there weren't any big globs of paint everywhere. The other thing that does is that it pulls the sort of horizon line down to sort of meet what's happening at the horizon, which I think can be helpful. So at this stage here, I'm feeling positive. I'm feeling like I'm laying in pretty quickly. I can see the big shapes in there that I know I want to play with. But before it goes any further, what I'm thinking to myself now is, why did you want to paint this? What was it that brought you to this image, to this scene, and then now in front of your easel? And I think my answer for that definitely is that, like I said in the beginning, is that really, really strong, warm color sort of surrounded by these cool colors. And that relationship was so important, really more important than any of the forms or anything like that. It was really just about this sense of light and color that I was interested in, and not so much about a specific house. And so I knew that I wanted to lay in that burst of color really early on, because that was going to show me so much about what the painting was going to look like. And even if you just sort of look at the image there, you can see what I want to paint. Granted, it's not complete. I think there are things kind of pulling you out of that moment, and that's what I mean by incomplete. But to lay in that big kind of burst of yellow amongst these blues was an important thing to do right out of the gate, to see, like, am I still interested in this? Is this going to have the effect that I want it to have? Is it going to hold my interest the way I want it to hold my interest? And my answer for this was for sure yes. That I could feel that sense of light already. That I knew that the subject was going to be captivating, because it was going to be about sort of playing with all these relationships and figuring out ways to stay focused on this despite having kind of a lot going on around it. One of the things I mentioned when we were looking at the image was these little passages on either side of the house, and I knew that was going to come into play as really, really important to sort of serve that defining moment that we see right there. And I think at this stage, what I needed to do is really lay in some more darks, because there's a really large value shift throughout the painting, in the sense that the sky, that sort of gradient sky that I talked about, is very light at the horizon, and that makes much of what's happening on the ground very, very. All that is to say that there's just some big value shifts happening in this painting, and ones I wanted to play with and at times over dramatize. That fence shape there I made much, much darker, coming in there with I think that's a Prussian blue and a burnt sienna to really, really push that dark. I also wanted, like I said earlier, wanted to pull that shape forward as much as I could, and having that sort of dramatic dark in the front really laid it in concretely. We've talked a little bit about line in this painting as well. As you can see there, I wanted to establish some lines of this house because I felt like the scale was off. Because I was sort of interested in this house, I felt like it was the shift of space wasn't quite right. The houses were almost too similar in sizes, so I wanted to make that house bigger. And a quick and easy way to do that, again, is to take that tapping knife and just lay in some quick lines. This is not to lock me in, as this is my official shape, but just some lines to sort of tell where I potentially wanted to put some things. You could see I put 2 lines on the edge of the house because I wasn't quite sure where I wanted that to go. One of the major things I think that is happening now in this painting is, as I start to get into more detail and more specific things, is that I really haven't covered the canvas yet. Like I said at the beginning, I have that sort of beige color to cover up the white, which is great, and it was an important feature of this painting, an important presence in this painting. But I really hadn't completed or acknowledged all of the other things that were happening in this painting. One of the things I mentioned really early on too was that I liked this like great temperature shift throughout the whole thing, that there was this super warm house surrounded by cool sky and then cool parking lot and buildings all around it. And that was something that I hadn't really yet addressed. I'd come in with some cool colors and then laid in that big yellow, but I knew that I wanted to sort of surround it with some cool colors before I went any further, because that was, again, so much of what drew me to this painting. So I knew I had to fill that in and start addressing parts of the painting that, to be honest, maybe don't feel like they're as important, but in many instances are more important. Having that bright streak of yellow wouldn't mean anything without all of this blue surrounding it. So now, I think the important question is what's going through my head? What am I thinking about? The painting is underway. I've been working on it for about 20 minutes, maybe 25, and I like what's there. I think that there's some strong early marks, which is nice. Again, with the goal of trying to finish this painting in one go. And so it becomes about, okay, what do I need to add? But then what do I need to maintain? What do I need to keep? What do I not want to overwork? What can be complete? What can be nice painting? What have I said enough of already? Because I think there are potentially a few moments in there somewhere. While I don't know what they are at this stage, that's what I'm thinking to myself as I'm working on this, which is, where do I add? What needs more? And I think specifically to answer those questions, that what needs more now is that really nothing is defined, and I think that potentially is a little distracting. You can kind of tell what everything is just by the shape of things, but things sort of only exist as big shapes, and I think a few moments of some specificity are what I'm thinking this painting needs next. I laid in that big yellow mark, but I didn't want it to just be one mark. I didn't want it to just be this one color. So I knew that going into the house next to it was going to be really important, and a little bit to mix up the size of mark that I'm doing, just so that it's not, again, not all these big shapes, but coming in there with some more stuff that was maybe a little more unexpected, handling paint in different ways. I'm still working very quickly here, and not too specific, but I am starting to find some new marks. Even just that subtle, I laid in some paint there with a brush and then scraped it away with the palette knife, just to have a subtle shift from the house next to it to sort of the main house that I'm looking at. And you can see with that subtle shift of temperature, it gets a little more orange. It sort of falls back a little bit more in space. And I'm not looking for something dramatic, because I kind of like that light bleeding together a little bit. I think that's often how the eye sees things, with this overpowering light on this cool scene. And so I wanted to mimic that sensation of looking at this, and not to just copy the photo, but to really think about what does it feel like to be there. I think the other thing on my mind was, again, the importance of that sky was really, really important. I had laid it in very, very quickly. I think I had just to sort of show that there was a gradient, and there was sort of this, as it got closer to the horizon, it sort of faded out more, and then as your eye goes further up into the sky, it got a little more saturated. But I had laid that in very, very quickly, and so I knew that that was going to be something that I was going to have to readdress. But it also gave me a chance to reshape some of what was happening on the horizon. So without having to kind of perfectly paint in the roofs, I could sort of carve around them a little bit with the sky to clean up a little bit, which is a nice feeling, and I think important at this stage, so that it's not sort of all equal amounts of messiness, which is a oversimplification of what's happening. But I think that's how I'm sort of choosing to describe it in this moment. So one of the things you'll notice me doing is that, I circle things. I come back to things. I sort of circle around to things. I started with that dark house on the right, and I sort of circled back to it, making it a little bit bigger and reestablishing it as a little bit larger. You can see me coming back into the sky here. This is a brayer, just a roller, just typically a printmaking tool, but it's a great way to, for me, it works to blend the sky a little bit and sort of bring up some of the horizon color up into the sky, and it adds a nice little kind of unexpected layer to it, where it's not this perfectly smooth or perfectly clean gradient,
but you still get that sort of sense of light. And so that brayer was a good tool for me for adjusting that sky a little bit more. And so I think that again, these are things I sort of all circle back to, that I don't want to linger on one thing too long. You don't want to just paint the sky for 20 minutes. Although I probably could. I probably could focus on that for that long, or just paint that house on the right-hand side for 20 minutes. But try and react to the decisions that you're making. So when that house gets bigger, what does it then make you want to do? When that sky gets a little bit cleaner, perhaps, what does that make me want to do? In this particular instance here, when I cleaned up that horizon line, I sort of saw areas where I hadn't really addressed what was going on in the background, and that sort of made me want to focus on that area for a few moments. So this is me here working on that passage to the left-hand side of that main house there. And again, going in there with very, very loose marks. All of that is very far away, and so I don't want to get too specific with that. I really just want to show the impression of what is happening back there, and not get too specific with what's going on. Here you'll see me circling back to that house. I laid in early on and then put some lines over it, and then came back to it with that big yellow mark. And now here I am going back into it again, saying I want to say a little bit more about the structure of this house, about the details of this house. There's a specificity to the shape of that burst of light that I think is really interesting. The way that light bends around the front of the house, I think is really interesting, and there's lots to show there. So this is me looking a little more specifically about those shapes and what those shapes are doing. I should also note that I'm well aware, after I lay this down, that it needs something, that carving shape, that harsh shape, kind of took away from a sense that I liked. So I knew that was going to need more. This is what happens is you make these decisions, and these decisions cause other decisions, and those decisions cause decisions. This is a normal way of working. And so with me sort of messing around a little bit here, I'm feeling okay about that. I know that I can sort of circle back, and I know I can come back to this, and I know I can find ways to make this work. And you'll see here that often the solution can be very, very simple. One of the things I just mentioned moments ago was that sort of harsh shape was distracting. That diagonal line there was bothering me a little bit. So I knew that I had to break that up, and you'll see in just a moment when I break it up, it's a slight move, but it makes a world of difference. I'm going to take my tapping knife here and just pull that yellow down and into the shadow a little bit. And as you can see, it immediately broke that line as that paint sort of bled over. And that made a big difference, because you weren't looking at it so harshly anymore. It softened it in a really subtle but effective way. Without a doubt, I'll circle back to that moment again, but pulling just a little bit of yellow into the shadow was important for that moment, and important for me to then move on. As you can see, I'm circling now back around to these are the trash cans here that were, I'm just having them as sort of silhouetted, again, making the value a little more dramatic than it was in real life. But the shapes, I think, are really, really nice, really, really important. I should note that I'm really not looking too meticulously at those trash can shapes. For me, it's not important to repeat what I saw in the image directly, but to make shapes that fit with the painting and that feel in the language of the painting. So I'm not getting real close and squinting and being like, oh, how many, how far away is this trash can from that trash can, or vice versa. I'm really just trying to get the impression that sort of something else is in the foreground there. Again, to sort of try and make moments around this house interesting as well, so that it's not just this house sort of surrounded by blue marks. All the while, I am still trying to maintain a certain sense of speed. Again, this video is sped up double speed, so I'm really working half as slow as what you're seeing here, but still trying to move with some speed. And one of the things that you'll see me do here is, I think one of the things that's really important about this painting is actually the sense of color. And I've mentioned that a few times. And I've gotten pretty specific with the color of the sky. I had to go back into that. I've messed with the colors around the house a few times, but I'm still feeling like I'm missing that glow in the house. And so it becomes about, how do you find it? What do you have to do? What does it take? Does the sky need to be lighter? Does the house need to be lighter? Does it need to be more yellow? Does it need to be more blue? There certainly is not one magical answer. I think that it's important to be willing to hunt for this and play with this. This is why I think it's so important to circle back around to things, even things that look good, but if they don't sort of sing in the same harmony as the rest of the painting, then they're not really doing their purpose. They're not really serving you any justice at all. And so I think what at this stage, what's going through my mind is, how do I make that house glow a little bit? And I think I like the saturation of that yellow, but I think it's a little bit too dark, and just upping the saturation a little bit while sort of using the orangey yellow that's there, not getting rid of that entirely, but adding another lighter value in there to really hope and make that pop, make that glow as much as I can. Granted, filming on this camera, it's not perfect. What you see is not totally perfect, and often in painting there are subtleties that matter so much to the artist that when they come on camera are really even more subtle. So it can be a hard thing to depict with the camera, but I think it's an important thing to mention as this painting is progressing. Again, I like what's happening. I'm liking the color palette on a whole. I'm liking the mark making. I think the composition is all right, although I still haven't really addressed making that sky as interesting as, and both the sky and the pavement sort of interesting moments. So I know I still need to address that, but as you can see here, I'm coming in with that lighter value for the house, while still leaving some of that sort of under orange in other parts of it. And I'm using the palette knife so I can get it on there really cleanly and really thickly, and boom, immediately for me that lights up so much more. That little difference goes a long way. We have some of that hard edge again, but because we've pulled some of that orange down into it, it bleeds into it a little bit nicer. So that hard edge is actually not bugging me as much as it was before with the other color choices that I had. One thing I have lost at this point is the structure of that house. So you can see me here trying to get a little specific about just sort of the moving around the house and the shapes of the house and how all that is constructed. and I have this sort of purple pink color that is by itself hideously ugly, but what I'm hoping that it does is sort of draw your eye to that yellow and make it feel like such a make it feel like that dramatic shift, which I think is so important to this painting. I love this kind of stuff. That house is painted the same color, but that when that light comes in on it, it looks like it's a totally different color, which to me is great. I love that kind of stuff. You can see that little mark on the window there on the right-hand side of the house. I think despite working quickly and despite being a very loose painter, those little moments can sometimes be really, really important, and to have some moments of specificity. That was another good moment in the painting, to sort of show the shadow of the overhang of the roof there, with that kind of burnt orange color. Really, I think is starting to bring it to life a little bit, and so I can really start to feel it. So it's at this stage that I'm feeling myself getting excited, because I think that I can sort of see what I'm looking at come into fruition. It's forming, and so it becomes about sort of how do you run with that? How do you build on that? Rather than, because you don't want to just sort of fill in other parts of the painting. You want to continue to make the painting interesting and kind of unexpected. So I'm definitely trying to maintain a looseness and a speed, so as not to just be cleaning edges. Although I do think there are some edges that need cleaning in this painting. You can see the right-hand house. I really haven't circled back to that in a little while, so that's something that I know needs addressing. I know that's something I'm going to have to go back into and really focus on a little bit if I want that to. If I want this painting to work, because it takes up more real estate than that yellow house that I've been working on. It doesn't mean that it's more important. It doesn't mean that it sort of has to be even better. It just means that I can't just not acknowledge that. As you can see, that bigger shape of the house, when I did end up laying in that roof to make it the whole thing a little bit larger, that larger dark does help the composition and helps the space quite a bit. I think it's always important to step back, so I sort of reframed the shot here so we can zoom in and look at the painting really briefly. I filled in a few of the details on that right-hand side of the house, and so this is sort of where we're at right now. And so it becomes about what does it need. And I think that sky and that pavement are just a little too even. So I think that it does need some of that activity in the top, like we had previously talked about. Now, for me, this is kind of a delicate process, because I don't want lines that are too goofy or gangly, but I also don't want lines that are too straight. And so what you're going to see me do here is use a mixture of a straight edge and then a mixture of freehand, to really try and vary both like the texture and the just how these power lines are handled, so they're not just sort of paint marks going across the top of the canvas, that they really are handled in a similar language to the rest of the painting, where there's kind of this perfect imperfection kind of idea. And so one of the I'm sort of laying them in here, knowing that I can I'm comfortable wiping some out if I have to. That's the kind of thing that doesn't bother me too much. I'm just adjusting my easel here because I'm realizing that there's sort of blank spots from where I had the easel holding the canvas. So I'm just briefly filling those in, so I don't have to worry about doing that later. And it lets me sort of look at the lines a little bit clearer again, which is important to me. So as you can see, it's not just laying in the lines, walking away, and calling it done. I'm actually laying a bit in, making some of them thicker, making some of them thinner, stepping back and seeing how that affects my eye. What I don't want, my thought process right now is that I don't want to have these lines just stop us. I don't want them to sort of cut us off and distract us from what's happening in the rest of the painting. This little lit up power line here, the post there, I think is important, just because I like having that yellow bounce just a little bit, and so we're not just sort of stuck in the center. That we move around a little bit more, just to sort of see what else is going on in other parts of the painting. So what you're going to see me do here is that I actually work on kind of eliminating pieces of the line. For lack of a better word, I smudge out some of the power lines so that it's not a continuous, perfect line. Because again, I think that can be distracting. That when we're looking, again, I talked before about what it's like to look at, what it feels like to look at these things. And so, I'm going in there with a rag and kind of smudging out some pieces of these lines, because when we're looking at something, we don't see these perfect lines. They sort of get caught in our peripheral vision sometimes, but we don't see like just these perfectly straight lines. And so I'm just kind of playing with them coming in and out of vision here. I point all this out and I sort of linger on this in this video because I think that I'm trying to finish the painting. I'm trying to wrap it up. And so I'm kind of trying to do this part slowly. This is by far the slowest I've painted throughout the entire session of the painting. I just sprayed a little bit of Gamsol on there to wipe some of that away. Again, I'm just wanting to fade some of those out so that we don't see it so perfectly. We do continue to sort of focus on the sky that is there. And again, this is slow. This is not me moving around the canvas. This is not me revisiting things over and over again. This is me trying to, both find and place that exclamation point or that punctuation mark that I feel like this painting really, really needs. I'm pretty happy with the power lines there. I like that they sort of come in and out of vision. I sort of like that effect there. So I'm going to fill in these blank spaces in the parking lot here, just where my easel was, and I'm going to just bring a little bit of just compositionally, just going to mess around a little bit with the dark of this left-hand house. It's barely there, but I think it's important to sort of kind of capture us in this moment. We're sort of trapped, I think, in this moment. And I wanted to just have a little bit of that dark on the right-hand side from the fence that I laid in. It's so dark that I wanted to have something else there just to balance that out just a little bit. It's catching a little bit of glare in the light right now on video, but I think that you'll see as it at the end that just having a little bit of dark there helped me bounce back into. It's a subtle decision, but again, I think finishing a painting like this, especially a larger painting, I think it's important to start fast and finish slow. That's okay. Putting those last few touches makes such a difference. So I'm obviously just about at the end here, and I'm just fussing a little bit with a few different things just to make them kind of all just fit together, kind of cleaning up a little bit of what's going on, but not really, aside from this, left-hand side, not really looking to change the painting too much. So now that I'm about wrapped up here, let's take a step back and take a look at the finished piece. Now, I was pretty pleased with the way this came out. Ultimately, I think what I was most excited about was that I wanted to do a larger painting. Again, this was 20 inches by 30 inches, and I just wanted to do it all in one sitting. I didn't want to go back into it, so I wanted to feel like everything was resolved when I walked away from it. And I certainly feel like everything's resolved at this stage, and I'm not sort of left wishing I had finished other parts more or anything like that. And so it really, in that sense, it really was a success for me. In addition, I think I got that glow that I wanted. There may be a few things that as time goes on that I may look into, but that's the nature of painting. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I appreciate you watching. Thanks.